Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's okay. Hope you can hear me nice, loud and clear. Very keen to get cracking on with today's Demo Day Wednesday. I was just going to give everyone a few more minutes to start rocking up, but it looks like we're starting to see the attendees rolling in, so we'll get cracking. First and foremost, my name's Matthew, one of the strategic BDMs here at FE Fund Info. So today, part of our Demo Day Wednesday series, I'll be running through a bit of a whistle-stop tour of our onboarding and cash flow planning tool, FE CashCalc. Going to run through a bit of the agenda now, and we'll get cracking. So just as an agenda point, so just first and foremost, a bit of a whistle-stop tour on the CashCalc side of things in terms of where you can start to find integration tools, how you can actually get set up within the system as well. Then we'll actually go into importing that client data. So I'll be utilizing some integrations that we have with Intelligent Office, but we've got a number of others that I'll talk about as well. Go on to actually building the cash flow. So we've got a few pre-built scenarios, but we're actually going to run through what we're actually gathering in that cash flow system, and then also actually developing a protection case in our gross cash flow modeler. Moving on from that, talking even more integrations. So hopefully you guys are familiar with our other tool, FE Analytics. Happy to say that we do have an integration between the two, and more exciting integrations to follow that as well. So, and then finally, feel free to ask some questions. So we do have a question box in the top right of the screen as we speak. So feel free to drop those down. I've got another colleague on there, so he might be able to answer those as the session progresses. If not, and it's a bit more of a technical thing, I can answer those towards the end. But before we crack on with a bit on CashCalc, just wanted to sort of talk about FE as a whole and what our focus is going forward. So this is some key statistics within our environment on the kind of client base that we work with, and we're very, very proud of that fact. We're actually in a sort of interesting or unique position within the market. So we're actually at the heart of the investment product life cycle that we're actually calling Nexus. So we're in a fantastic position in the market, which actually allows us to use our data in a variety of ways, from onboarding and research to production of reporting and enriching the end client experience. So we actually want to deliver data-led solutions that connect the advisors to their clients. We call that Nexus, as I said. So Nexus for financial advisors actually sits in between the back office and other platforms, providing you with the required tools to actually complete the advice journey. So without further ado, let's actually go on to the advice journey itself, onto the demo. So I'm just going to minimize this screen. We'll jump into our CashCalc. So hopefully you guys can see that okay. I'm just going to double check everything else. Super. There we go. Perfect. So everything is all set up. So this is our first screen for FE CashCalc. So first and foremost, we've got our main screen, any recent clients that we've built along the right-hand side, any sort of client demographics along the center as well, how many we've onboarded through our onboarding system, as CashCalc is not just a cash flow planning tool, it is also an onboarding and cash flow planning tool, along with a lot of other tools in between as well. But we've also got a sort of ready onboarded kind of thing for your own self onboarding to make sure that you're getting the most from CashCalc going forwards as well. And that's along the left-hand side. Clearly, we've got a few recent clients, and there's a few Blue Peter here, what I built earlier, that we will be talking on in a second. But first and foremost, I just wanted to make sure you're aware that we do have other demo days as well, specifically for CashCalc. So in the demo day series, this touches on a number of other products within our product set, but we've also got CashCalc focused demos, and those are via our book a demo slot in the top right hand side of our screen. We've actually got 2 weekly demos, one for the cash flow, which is going to be similar to what I'm talking about today. And then we've also got our free onboarding demonstration as well, which my lovely colleague Jody actually did a demonstration in as part of our demo day series last week. So it's very, very similar to that. We've also got a number of resources in terms of support as well, and as well as YouTube channels and the likes of that, which you can actually find just in the top right hand side of your main screen as well. FE Fund Info, Advice Hub TV, all the resources and short videos there can be found in there as well. Now, before I actually get onto adding a client and other bits like that, I just want to talk about getting yourself set up with integrations so you can import data seamlessly. So first and foremost, we just want to jump into settings. And this is where you'll find a number of different areas that we can actually update and personalize for our own firm. So first and foremost, of course, would be our branding. So your advisor logo in here, and you can actually, if you're a large scale firm, can apply this to all users within the group as well. So just a matter of uploading that image and good as gold. We can then actually go down into our tabs and jump into integrations. And these are all of our two-way integrations that we have within the system, namely IntelliFlow and Xplan at the top there. We see being used the most. I've got an IntelliFlow Office integration that I'll be sort of showcasing today. I'm not an IO whiz, but I will be able to show what we can and can't do within that integration as well. There is a few other bits and pieces that's worth showcasing within the settings. That's actually our investment proposition settings as well. So you can actually build your own growth templates and asset allocations if the ones that are pre-built in the system aren't to your liking. You can do that as well. And of course, add your own charges. Just makes things even easier as well going forwards. So without further ado, let's actually jump into the importing a client from IO or indeed building one at scratch. So there's a number of different ways we can add a client. Firstly, using this big red button in the top left-hand side, just going to hit add new client. And we're going to be given two options, either add new from scratch, so we can start to input that data ourselves manually, or we can actually import from back office. Because I've linked IO, I can do that nice and quickly, import from back office. It's recognized I've got an IO login, and I'm just going to search by the last name of IoT, IO test. I'm just going to search through there, and it's found one client that's already linked and my own client there. Click onto that and we can add a client. That's going to pull through all the data that we have on that particular client and bring us through into the client's dashboard. Now, as I said, I'm not an IO whiz. I didn't go to the expense of adding all the data again because I already have one built in. So I'm just going to go home and jump into Tony and Melissa, which is a situation that I've already pre-built within IO and brought forwards. And so if we jump into the information tab along the top, we can actually see all the different information that actually gets added from IO or Xplan or any of the other back office systems we've spoken about. So we can see we've got a nice brief understanding of their investments, pensions and assets and so on and so forth. We can actually instantly print a letter of authority if we want to, and that's going to pre-populate any information that we might have, whether that's the pensions or assets and their policy numbers and things like that. And because this is a joint client, we can actually choose who this applies to. Now, what I wanted to show just before we jump into the actual cash flow itself is just the different tabs within the information tab itself, because this is sort of almost the golden source of the truth, because we've brought it directly from our CRM or from our back office, all the information that we can show. So one of which is actually our servicing tab, which I'll leave to the end because it's sort of one of our newest pieces. But if I just jump into the risk profile, if we've added any risk profiles in there, these would be shown. Our investments have pulled through. So this client has a HSBC cash account with 15,000 in it. Same thing with our pensions. We've got two pensions there that are sat there and their respective policy numbers. And we can see just via this little green access button here that we do have these integrated into our back office. Then, of course, going to assets, if we do have a home in there, any liabilities, i.e. mortgages, and then incomes. Now, we've got a net and a gross cash flow modeler, so we can use either net or gross salaries in here as well. We've also got our expenses, whether those are essential or lifestyle or discretionary, as the FCA have asked us to factor these by. We've also got sustainable investing. That's sort of our own little thing that we've added. We have our own sustainable investing questionnaire that we can add, and you can put the inputs in there. Same thing for our notes and objectives. These are any notes or objectives that you might have discussed with a client that you just want to keep secure in one space. Lastly is this servicing tab. So the servicing tab itself is essentially a way for you to schedule upcoming reviews and actually just have the client being sent that data automatically. So if they are now going to be sat into CashCalc, we can actually use this to actually send out fact finds in the future, as well as any attitude to risk questionnaires and documents as well. So if I was to press schedule a review, we can choose a next review date, when we want this to repeat, who in the team we need to notify. So if it's myself and a different paraplanner, and then how far in advance. We can then choose what we actually want to send to the client. So we can use a new fact find, which is going to send a pre-populated fact find with all the information we already have. So it's not sending a blank one for them to fill out again and again and again. And then we've also got our ATRQ, which is powered by eValue, that we can send in advance as well. Of course, as well as our sustainable investing questionnaire that I briefly mentioned. And that is essentially the information that you'd need to actually update into a calculator. And that's what we're going to do now. So I've got all the information in our info tab, and all I have to do now is just press update to calculator. And it's going to take all the relevant information depending on the calculator I choose. So as I mentioned, we've got a net and gross calculator, and we've got a number of others, which I'll touch on towards the end of the session, of all the different calculators that we have. But today I'm going to use the gross cash flow modeler, which is our sort of up and coming. We've had it for a number of years now, and we're actually going to be doing a large scale upgrade to that in the future. So more on that in a bit as well. So we've got a few bits and pieces that it's going to pull through from us. We've got savings and investments, any pensions and incomes, and of course those expenses down the left as well. In true Artattack fashion, I have pre-built one already, and I'm just going to jump into the cash flow and just detail what kind of things that I've tweaked or added within there. So I've just jumped into cash flow here and gross. So I've got a gross cash flow, and we've just called this current situation. Tony, Melissa, in their 40s, clearly doing well for themselves based on this current cash flow that we can see. But let's have a look in there. So once we're in the gross cash flow modeler, it's very, very similar to our net if you've seen that. And all we're gonna do is just start from the top of the tabs along the left-hand side and work our way down until we're happy. And I'll go through what I've tweaked and what's actually already been input. So firstly, we've got our assumptions. So this is where we can set any CPI or RPI, when we actually want the forecast to end. And then we go into our people and timeline with a few other assumptions. So any lump sum allowance, MPAA triggers, or anything like that, as well as our events and timeline. So you'll notice in our events and timeline, there's a few things that actually get pre-populated, and then there's a few things that I've added, and I'll explain what those actually do. So in this situation, Tony is doing fine, but in the family, they are susceptible to an illness that could be hereditary. So we've just put that to where he's retired for the time being, because this could come into play later on. ONS life expectancy based on legal sex and age and things like that, it gets pre-populated, and all I've added on top of that is mortality, just to signify the end of the forecast. But we've got those in there as well. Then going down, we've got savings and investments. So savings and investments are things just essentially that aren't pensions. So any ISAs, LISAs, things like that, and current account. Now, within CashCalc, the current account is always there, and that is essentially the account for spending. So if in the event of an expense, it's always going to be taken out of the current account for that case. Now, when you first pull these through into CashCalc, unless it's specified, it will just put a default growth rate of 0%. So we can change that going forwards as well. Given it's in cash, we might not want to, as we know, inflation very much exists. Moving on the way down as well, we've also got some pensions, as well as some state pensions that I've added as well. So we've got those two pensions that have came directly from IO, and the two other state pensions that I've said that they're eligible for the full amount, and that will then of course update should that ever change in the future as well, which of course it will. All I've done here is I've also put them on a variable growth template, which is worth mentioning, because if I was to hit edit here, we've got the option to choose a linear or a variable. Again, it's neither here nor there. It's completely up to yourselves on that. You might have certain set linear rates that you'd want to focus on. We do have variable, and it's worth mentioning that because our integration with analytics is actually looking to get data from your FE account, FE analytics account, for future projected returns. based on past performance of those particular models that your clients might be in. So that's where the integration is going, actually pulling portfolios to and from analytics and CashCalc for variable growth templates such as this. We've got a few pre-built ones. As you can see, I've just used a balanced benchmark here, and the growth rates are below, just for our client. It's also worth mentioning within here, because this is the gross cash flow model, we do have to tell the system how we want that to be taxed, i.e., is the pension fully uncrystallized or is it uncrystallized? And we can see that here. In this case, the pension is fully uncrystallized, so we don't have to worry about that for the time being. Close that out. Last thing to mention while we are on savings, investments, and pensions is this pot liquidation order. So you'll notice that on savings, investments, and pensions as well. If I was to press set pot liquidation order, unless we have a defined withdrawal strategy, this is how the pots will be tackled in the event of a shortfall. So this client is in his 40s, still on an income, so we should be fine. However, when they retire, they no longer have a sort of steady income. Once that current account is depleted, it will then attack those pots in this particular order that we've defined. So that's worth mentioning, just to be cautious of. Then, of course, we do have those incomes that I mentioned. Now, what I've done based on the situation that we are creating a protection case is I've linked Tony's salary to Tony's illness, which at the current moment is the same age as his retirement, so we can keep that as is. Whereas Melissa's, we've just kept that to Tony's retirement age, to Melissa's retirement age, which is 59 there. So if I go down again, we can then go down to expenses. Again, we can see that priority of essential lifestyle or indeed discretionary if we did have any discretionary spends. In this case, we've not. Everything's happy. And then we've just got some employer pension contributions that we've added as well. That's part of that. Now, at the moment, we've not got any withdrawal strategies. Perhaps that's not something that they're focused on. But lastly, in our inputs and timelines, we've just got our advice fee for both Tony and Melissa, just as a 1% charge there. Now, once we're happy with all the setup, we can then actually focus on the cash flow itself. So I'll jump into the cash flow model. And we've got within the gross cash flow, actually 3 separate models, so to speak, within the cash flow. So our first one, which you can see here, is just our savings over time. So this client is very much doing well they're very much doing well for themselves. No real issues whatsoever in terms of their spend or their overall cash flow. We can actually see what's being used where in our separate table, which is our money in versus money out. So if we jump into our money in versus money out, we can actually see those expenses, and they actually get reduced later on down the line as well. We can see this black line being those total expenditures there and what's actually being used to cover that. So you can see the salaries at the current moment are more than enough to cover those expenses at the time. And then when they are nearing retirement, we can see that they receive state pensions for both Tony and Melissa at separate ages. And then the rest of that is actually just the current account. So what's actually left as surplus income, just being there to tackle that there until we actually jump into the pension pots. And we can see already, and I'll go on to this in the yearly breakdown later on, we can see how this is being taxed. So in Tony's case, it's actually UFPLS, and later on it might be flexi access drawdown and so on and so forth, depending on what we've told the system. So as I suggested, we've got plenty of cash to deal with. However, Tony is susceptible to potentially falling ill, and we might want to talk to Tony about creating a protection plan and paying for income protection. So what we can do is, rather than having to create those inputs again and again and again, we can actually clone this forecast and then start tweaking it as we need to. So all I'm going to do is press create new forecast, and I'm actually going to clone from existing down the bottom, and we will call this Tony illness. Super. There we go. Can't spell illness. There we go. Fantastic. And we're going to clone that from the current situation and press create. And once that's loaded, super. So we've got Tony's illness in the top left there, so we know that that's been built. Again, still misspelled illness. That is awesome. And what we're going to do then is actually start to tweak those inputs and timelines again. But because we've actually already added our people and timeline event of Tony illness and linked those incomes to that, we can actually do this relatively quickly. So what we can actually do is simply drag and drop our Tony illness to potentially falling ill earlier while he's still receiving an income, and actually see what effect that can have. So we can do that on this screen, that events and timelines screen. But what we can also do is actually utilize our stress testing tab. So if we jump into stress testing, we're going to have a few options here. So we've got a sort of deterministic stress tester, which is what I'm about to essentially do here. We've also got Monte Carlo, which is coming. So it has stochastic modeler. We have that in the net and we have it as a standalone tool, which I'll show, but it is coming to the gross cash flow tool soon as well. But if I just use the tabs along the top, we can see what kind of stress testing we can do. So we can actually adjust the people, adjust assumptions, growth rates, etc., or we can actually just adjust the events and timeline. So in this instance, I'm utilizing this Tony illness timeline event, but this could be for reduction in sort of expense over time. So they might wind down and you utilize when they can afford to wind down, i.e. their expenditure goes from X to Y, and we can link that in here. And so we can actually drag and drop this. Let's just say Tony falls ill perhaps in the next 5 years. We'll drag over to 51, and it's just going to calculate that for us and actually update that cash flow. So we can see that's looking pretty bleak for Tony and Melissa, should Tony fall ill within the next 5 years. Again, we're not going to play God too much, but we can drag and drop this, should we wish, to any other areas. But this might be the scenario that we want to paint Tony and Melissa just to add that. Now, in this instance, Tony's not paying for protection, and we then see, if we jump into our inputs and timelines, just to confirm this, Tony's income actually stops within the next 5 years. We still have Melissa's, but it's not actually covering us into our 70s at all. So we can actually see what's happening in our money in versus money out again, see what's being used to cover that. We've not got enough and we will run out of money. Now, what we can then do is actually suggest Tony takes a protection plan out. So what can we actually do with that? So if I was to then create a new forecast, and I will do so as is, I'll then clone from existing, and rather than the current situation, I'm going to clone from Tony's illness, and I'll call this Tony protection. We will create. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to add in a little bit of extra setup within our inputs and timelines again. Nice and easy. Rather than adding in an income for the time being, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to jump into savings and investments, and I'm going to add an empty pot just called protection payout. So I'm just going to add in savings and investments, and I'll just call this income protection payout. Now, the reason for this, and again, we can maybe have that as a linear growth or even a variable, it doesn't really matter at this point. We can add in a linear investment. We're going to say it's a starting pot value of 0, and we can add that as is. The reason for this is typically when we see a large lump sum, we as the financial advisors aren't going to suggest they keep that in a current account and just let that erode away over time to cover those expenses. We're going to say, no, you should invest that lump sum elsewhere. So what we can actually do is actually, rather than adding in a sort of an income, we can actually add in an external contribution for this. So in this case, we've got that income protection payout. We're also just going to add in an expense, and that expense, of course, is our monthly premiums. So we can say that might be based on the risk. That might be, that might be £200, and I'm just going to call this protection premium. Super. And call this essential. Could even be discretionary, but we'll call it essential. There we go. And we'll just say it's £200 every month from now until Tony falls ill. We're then going to add that expense, and that's going to be added there, right? Nice and easy for us to see. Then what we're going to do is jump over to contributions, and we're going to actually add in a contribution. Now, because this isn't a personal contribution, it's actually a sort of external, we can change that type. We're going to say it's an employer / external contribution, and we're going to contribute that to our income protection payout pot, ready for us to then reinvest elsewhere should we wish. And I'm just going to call this protection payout. Super. And we're going to let's just say that is 200,000 there. And that is just going to be a one-off payment at Tony's illness. So just using those timeline events, we'll adjust for inflation to retain today's value, and we will add that contribution. Now, based on this, what we can then do is actually have a look at the cash flow model and see what kind of effect that's had. So if we then jump into our cash flow model, savings over time, we can see it's looking a lot healthier than what it did. And again, let's just compare and contrast using our compare feature down in the top right, so up in the top right even. And we're actually going to compare our current protection case based on the one without protection. We can see that we've added a few more years onto that forecast as well. Again, still not the nicest picture. We're painting worst case scenario. Again, if you wanted to do a slightly different situation, we can always change that stress testing and maybe increase the amount of years that Tony has before he potentially falls ill. And again, we're just chopping and changing, almost adjusting those goalposts as and when needed. And in a matter of 20 minutes ish, 15 maybe, if you're a pro, we've actually developed a full protection case based on the current situation, and we can actually dive in deeper, do some additional stress testing. But what I sort of want to get across here is utilizing that extra pot as well. Is this could be, this is in this instance used for that protection payout with those pots. If I just jump into that savings and investments, that protection payout's been used for this, but it could be used for any injection of capital. So if you wanted to create a case where your clients are downsizing their house, rather than it going into the current account, we've got this going into a separate ISA or whatever it might be for that injection of capital for downsizing. So based on how much money that they get from the equity within that house that they sell, and then purchase a separate one. Whatever's left over, we can put into that particular pot and actually see what effect that's having on the cash flow overall as well. So there's plenty of different ways that we can do this. In this instance, it was the protection case. Now, a few bits and pieces I've not touched on just yet, and that is actually the yearly breakdown, which is a lot of information for the client, but it's probably going to benefit you guys because you really show the power of the setup over the gross cash flow. The net cash flow has its place, but the gross, you can do a lot more and you can get a lot more information out of it. So if I jump into the yearly breakdown and I just show 2 different years, so a year where they are actually receiving an income versus a year where they are perhaps not, and what different effects that has. So let's just pick second year. This client we can see is a higher taxpayer, and we can actually see that based down here, Tony's income tax. We can see the different tax brackets being chosen there. Same with Melissa's, with that personal allowance and the basic tax rate there. We can have a look at any money out as well as any insights that might show up, i.e. they might be paying extra tax at some point and the system will let us know why, if that is the case. Now, if I scroll down and jump over to when they retire, so deep into their 60s perhaps, we can actually see that because we've not set up any withdrawals that ourselves, we can see what kind of withdrawals are being taken based on the setup. So we've got an uncrystallized pension, so we can see that that's an ad hoc withdrawal from Tony's pension via UFPLS in this area, and what kind of taxes are incurred on that based on the withdrawals that we're doing that particular year. Same thing for any others, and we can see that now Melissa's pension is being attacked years later, and so we can see that that's being used there to cover any shortfall as well. Lastly, of course, we do have our reports. So if I was to create a report, just using this, we can choose whether we want that in a Word document or a PDF. Again, if you're snipping extra bits and pieces together, you might want to utilize the Word document, but I'll just use PDF just to show what other bits and pieces we can do. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to actually add in an extra option. Because we've used a variable growth template, we might want to showcase what kind of growth that the client will be seeing, not necessarily expecting, because past performance is no guarantee of future performance, of course, but we can just simply show what we're using and why. So if I was to tick that and press PDF report, what we should see in a matter of moments is a 15-page report with our logo and colors and branding and all that kind of stuff all ready for us. So it's nice and personal to the client and to our firm. Now, scrolling down, we'll get an introduction and an overview. I've only used the one situation, but you can use multiple. Of course, it would be a larger report. And we would just get a breakdown of the assumptions and any growth rates and so on and so forth. And of course, our growth rates over time that we suggested on both of those pots over the next 30 or so years. And we can see in the red those where there's a negative, and of course the rest being positive. And then lastly, incomes and expenses, and of course our two cash flow model situations there with a nice little key. So it's nice and easy for the client to understand what's going on. And then lastly, of course, our taxes, which is the one tab that I didn't go into, which is actually just the taxes graph, which essentially explains where the taxes are being used and what's actually being taxed. So in this case, it's income tax or national insurance. And then, of course, a year-by-year breakdown should we wish to include that as well. Now, jumping off of that and back into here, just lastly wanted to touch on the integration side of things. So actually pushing things back into it, IO, should we have ever changed things in here. So if I just jump back into the information tab, and let's just suggest that within here, we've actually added a discretionary expense like we did in the cash flow itself. We can actually jump into our expenses. In this case, we've got essential and lifestyle. We've bundled those together as is, but we might have a separate expense, for a gym or something like that. So Melissa's gym expense, for example, and that might be £60 every month. And we won't bother putting a start or an end date, but we can leave it as is. We'll change that expense type to personal, and we can create that. We now have something in CashCalc that doesn't sit in IO, and we don't like that. So all we need to do is jump into our integrations tab along the top, hit integrations, and you'll notice that we have a few numbers along the left-hand side. These numbers signify something that we have within this system that isn't currently in our CRM. And so and it's also worth mentioning, this is all the information that we can pull and push from our CRM systems. So if I was to jump into expenses along the bottom, we can see our gym expense, and we can see that it is missing that coveted green tick or green band to suggest that the expense is integrated within the CRM. So all I'm going to do here, click into it, and we've just got to tell the system where in IO this needs to sit. Otherwise, we don't want this overwriting in any particular other area. So you'll notice that we've got IntelliFlow information. We've just got to tell the system where this sits and what it actually sits under. So I'm going to say that this is owned by Melissa using the drop down and change that category. We've got a category in IO called gym that we can link now. Now, if we already had a gym expense, we can link that to the existing. So for example, if that's went from £55 to £60 and we've just updated it in CashCalc because it's easier, then we can link that to an existing expense and it will find that expense for us and confirm us that we want to update that expense. In this instance, it's brand new. So all I'm going to do is press export to IO, and what we should see is nice tick saying successfully updated expense. So if I was to go into IO now, we would see that sat in there. Now I'm not an IO whiz. I actually don't know where that sits in the IO expense section, but I can assure you it is there now. So that's essentially the integration with IO. In terms of integrations with analytics, we've actually got a few options. So actually utilizing my separate client, Murphy IoT, I've actually got a pension in there with actual data based on holdings and things like that I built into IO. It was a nightmare, but I managed to do it. And if I jump into info and go into our pensions, we can see we've got an Aviva pension here. Now, if I click into that Aviva pension, I've actually got an investment breakdown. that I can import the latest valuation holdings. So that's just spoke to IO, and it's given me that L&G fund. It's the only fund I've added in there. It was just for demonstration purposes, but I've got £1 million worth of that in there. Now, there is a few bits and pieces I can do straight away and have the system talk to analytics. One of which is actually just generating a medium scan, which will talk to analytics. You based on the information that we have within the portfolio. In this case, it's one fund. It's just going to give us a sort of asset allocation breakdown and things like that and performance statistics. Equally, if I wanted to go into a bit more granularity and use my FE Analytics use my FE Analytics access for different bits and pieces and more granular research, I can actually just export this portfolio to analytics. And what it's now saying, it's talking to the separate system. It's asking me if I have a login in analytics. Now I do, and I've got single sign-on. It's going to log me in, and I'll open the tab for me, and it's brought that portfolio directly into my active list for me to do other research. If I click into that portfolio, I can actually see the portfolio and the weightings based on the exact information that we had from IO. So it's essentially a IO to CashCalc to analytics workflow or integration that we have within there for us to do that. Now, what this has allowed us to do is actually open the door to further integrations. And as I mentioned, that sort of asset allocation data or even the performance data being pushed back into CashCalc for forward-looking projections. That's the idea, and that is coming soon. There's a lot of other bits and pieces coming soon as well, namely we've got lots of gross cash flow updates. So we're actually looking at updating it and utilizing things like CGT, pension salary sacrifice, and a few other bits and pieces as well. So please keep an eye out for updates as and when they come. Now we've got 8 minutes. That's essentially everything I wanted to show, which is fantastic. So I might be able to give you some time back. If there is any questions, I'm all going to have a look now. We've got 5. So let's have a look. We've got some questions from here. I've been using the Netcash method for a while now and have always just so is there ways to switch? Yes, absolutely. So we've had a question come in asking if you've used information within one cash flow tool, can you actually just use that in the gross? Now, if you're updating things in the calculator itself, no. But if you are updating things in the information tab, which is essentially, as I mentioned at the start, the sort of the golden source of truth, you can push and pull that through anywhere. So what I would recommend you do is if you are altering actual extraneous detail, like the pension valuation, like the incomes and expenses, rather than just seeing what would happen if it wasn't a certain expense. If they actively have changed, update those in this information tab, because then all you have to do is update a calculator and push it through into the gross. Now we have had that question before, so I'm not going to say never in terms of pulling stuff directly from net to gross, but that's what I would suggest in this instance. So hopefully that's answered your question. Super questions been answered in the demo, which is fantastic. I think that's everything. It looks like the other questions been answered. So I will just leave you with this, which is just to say thank you very much for joining me on this demo. I don't know why it's not showing the screen, which is absolutely fantastic. Oh, there we go. End of slideshow. Fantastic. So it's just to say, yeah, thank you very much. We do have other products as well. So feel free to scan those barcodes and feel free to connect with myself. More than happy to jump on separate sessions, especially if I look after one of your firms, that we can jump on and run through various different scenarios or even live cases within the system as well. Now, just leave that on for another 30 seconds and just see if any other questions come through. But if not, have a wonderful Wednesday and I will speak to you guys soon, hopefully. Thank you very much.